As a kid, I loved reading this small book of scary stories. There was one that always came to mind so vividly, where a young boy reads psalms to a dead princess who was a witch. He'd go for 3 nights and was armed with an exact ritual that would protect him. Yet when he got there and began, it was the terrifying idea that he couldn't look upon her the entire time. Otherwise, she'd be able to kill him. That got me. Her coffin would creak open. She would leap out at him suddenly and attempt to attack him. She'd growl and gnash at him. It was incredibly horrid and vivid, and yet the boy was brave and held out all 3 nights. It was terrifying to me as a kid how much I could clearly imagine it, and yet it was just a story. As I got older and into anime and manga, there was this similar feeling I'd get sometimes. The chill, the thrill, the pure atmosphere of the work. It was all there, and in greater force. Manga have a more specific sense of control over this than anime, where the art can be so locked in to stylistic choices that it's hard to remove that and have the same story. Anime can intensify this through music and voice acting, or they can ruin it altogether. Often I think of this feeling as a sort of power of presence or an aura of power level that is just so strong, it hits you no matter what. Especially in darker stories where action slow burns and atmosphere engulfs the reader. It's sort of like Jacksepticeye says in his playthrough of Still Wakes the Deep.
Makes my lungs feel like I can't breathe. You know when you watch a movie and you're like, you know you can breathe, but the character can't, so it feels like you can't?
Well, I do get this immersion in watching anime. It feels so much more intense to me in manga. And there's few that really perfectly hit this note for me. Often it's in the greater balance of a distinct art style choice and clear desire to capture a specific sense of imagery or atmosphere. There's a beauty that exists in even the most ugly styles, but some stories attempt to capture that with a certain level of almost blissful beauty. For example, Drops of God does great in showing you its true essence. It takes itself just far enough with its presentation to capture the way its characters think about wine and what it means to them, in addition to the dramatic framing that makes the real moments feel powerful. It's a great drama and competitive story, but it doesn't take itself too far to present the scene to the reader. Part of this is because it's the age of the series. Drops of God is very likely one of the older series to present the atmosphere of their scenes so directly to the audience, and so dabble with elements of atmosphere in the beginning, only grow as it goes on and push bigger scenes. Yet there are other series today, even those in the competitive genre, like Food Wars, that take it so far to present it as literal sensations, to the point if you start Drops of God, it seems tame at that point. Especially when not every moment can be described in ways that fully immerse the character and reader. Sometimes the sensation or flavors are presented in comparison to concepts, feelings, and such. Yet, I'd say that still has its own power in a field like this. It helps demonstrate and open the reader to something they hadn't considered they could understand before. And that's what makes it so powerful. Some analogies, metaphors, and such are dependent on the fact that you have experiences that match the comparison being made. Drops of God simplifies that by presenting smaller, simpler comparisons like roses and scents that naturally occur in wine and nature, since they're things people could easily experience in their life, before elevating it to grander level and full-scale experiences, like fields of flowers, vivid paintings, music, and such. That ultimately makes it more fulfilling as the scale continues out, to the point that Drops of God is a story that lays out the life of a man through wine and presents that as vividly as possible to the reader through his passion for wine. Something that enhances the experience, the presence the story emanates, is done with the way the art techniques arrange themselves in the work. In early volumes of Drops of God, There's this natural and dreamy look that they use to present the experiences of the wines. Very clearly done with pencils rather than ink and screen tones, as the rest of the panels are. When recreating an artwork, it uses chunky block brushing and screen tone placement to emulate not just the painting itself, but the texture of paint on canvas. There's a lot of different ways that as a comic it presents its story, but as a medium, plays with how it makes you feel reading that story. So when a manga chooses to be so miserable, telling a twisted story, and refusing to simply let ugliness be ugly, it can be breathtaking. Kind of freaky sounding, I know, but listen, you can feel sensations and such in a story, but when you can feel the story itself, the way it's trying to immerse you, that's what I find really fascinating. Shinichi Sakamoto is a man you've likely heard of if you watch a lot of manga essays. From works like The Climber to Innocent and Dracula, the beauty and misery he can convey is incredible. His works highlight this astonishing ability he has to take something and bring out this essence in it. With The Climber, it's this desperation and instinct to climb, whether it's mountains or life. With his newest work, Dracula, it's a horror and confusion deeper in the pages of the diaries than what they say on the page. Yet Innocent is where that truly begins. Innocent is not Shinichi's first foray into manga, as I mentioned. In that way, any creator has certain limitations to making their craft. The Climber was a unique event where Shinichi went from working with someone else to making the story all on his own. And even before that, Shinichi had made his own series. I think that switch up, though, helped him in making his work. Innocent is a manga that goes from capturing things from a historical fiction sense to something so much more. Reading Shinichi's work in general is a feast for the eyes, but Innocent in particular, it's deeper than simply watching a story unfold. It perfectly marries the sense of imagery and storytelling that a medium like manga is supposed to, but does it in such a way that, without a doubt, is the very sense of drama and being that is theater. Innocent follows the story of Charles Henry Sanson, the quote-unquote greatest executioner of France. The story takes place across his lifetime, from young adolescence to his final days. His life vow is to be the last executioner of France, and his life's work is the assistance he provides in the creation of the guillotine. Alongside him, though, is the secondary protagonist, Mary Henry Sanson, the fictional younger sister who takes a higher interest in execution practices than her elder brother, and in some ways exceeds him. The evolution of these two's relationship is the hooking premise of their story. Charles's naivety and Mary's hunger make their dance worth every watch. I think the way that Shinichi accomplishes this is by playing with his composition and framing. Literally playing with the frames of the manga sometimes. A lot of manga will allow themselves to distort or play with their scenes to convey drama, comedy, and such. But the way that Shinichi chooses to do it constantly pulls the narrative and reader through so many hoops of visual playing that as the story goes on, it's not jarring when it goes into a full dramatic narrative. Shinichi's overall style pushes for realism. There's textures on every piece of clothing. You can see each character's breath in the winter. And hair is defined enough to give it weight and shape. You'd be hard-pressed to find a page that doesn't apply textures. Even on skin, hatching lines cross the grooves and curves of the skin, of the body. And at that, it's not purely in black the textures appear. There's a lot of times, especially in his later work, that Shinichi uses white on top of black to detail, creating brighter highlights and line textures. It exemplifies expressions too. Even in their realism, the textures and shapes of the face can take on a terrifying darkness, like the skull is what you're seeing and not the face. Innocent in general treads this line of beauty and disgust. The image of horror fill every shadow that passes over the characters. Sansons themselves are likened to death and the Grim Reaper. Dark roses and petals wither around them or bear thorns so sharp they cut you on the page. And there is, in general, a fair amount of gore. In depicting early France, and at that, the story of one of the most prominent executioners, there are aspects of torture, abuse, death, and such that were everyday lives of these people. And Shinichi doesn't shy away from that. There's a constant sense of dread that lays over the Sansons for that reason. Yet, on the opposite side, the world of the royals and aristocrats is so bright and bubbly, saturated with light and abundance. Except when it wants to hide itself in dark rooms, hidden corners, midnight outings. The worlds are opposites, but when they clash, there's a beauty to all the darkness. In even the brightest environments, a shadow of misery somehow creeps in. Some of it is built over the process of presenting basic concepts. For example, the weapon of the executioner is a sword with 3 holes in the end. It's considered to be a symbol of the Gothic trefoil in some cases, and its overall shape is determined by the fact that it didn't need to be used in combat. It was purely a sword for executions. But Shinichi uses this as part of the story's first arc, where Charles Henry is reckoning with the sound that he has come to associate with the whistle of the sword, brought on by the holes in the tip. When he swings it, he doesn't simply hear a whistle, he hears a screech, a scream, the terror of those dying. And Shinichi shows us this before telling us. By literally showing in each swing, there's a moment that Charles can see and hear a scream. There's no need for sound effects or onomatopoeias. Rather, we can imagine the sound when we see the image. This is something Shinichi talks about in the short documentary by Archipel, where we may not know what an avalanche sounds like, but we can maybe know what a collapsing building does. So he portrays that in the same few pages so we can hear the scene just as vividly as we see it. It's later that we find the sword wouldn't ring at all if he swung it properly. That's an exaggeration for the story intensity, but still ends up making sense once you put it into the story because it ties so well with Charles's mentality. Henry is expected to be able to carry out these duties with precision, not just for his image as the Monsieur Executioner, but for the criminal to meet a swift end without the screams of the damned ringing out. He, at that point, though, has yet to understand that. These uses of images and such, in place of traditional effects, is a big part of the series, though. The stories that are told take from history, personal diaries, and they become true dramatizations. The way this is played on is also in style. There's a very realistic style used through the series, but it is broken by effects, dreamy settings, and a bigger exaggeration, a more manga and anime-like style. The events of the characters are showing usual comparisons and stretches we make for modern understanding, like cell phones to letters and clicks to rich people hangouts. These are the many ways that life has evolved and yet is still comparable to itself. Shinichi's choice to constantly and thoughtfully portray these moments make each one work so well to the next step and moment that as the story escalates, each exaggeration, each metaphor and moment, it becomes inevitable that they somewhat implode on themselves and make each other unrecognizable. You can feel like you're reading a diary, like you're sitting in a theater, or like you're reading a different manga altogether. It can and knows how to make you feel all those stories in one. I think the best portrayal of Innocent's characters and world, why these are the lives and stories being told, is in its final chapters, where our fictional Sanson, Mary, is sentenced to death by Robespierre. Yes, Robespierre.
Someone mentioned slaying a queen? Robespierre, no!
She, imprisoned, sees visions of Jacques Damiens, the son of Robert Francis Damiens, and a member of the Enrages, an early revolutionary group. Robert Francis is one of the first men Mary watches the execution of, and Jacques himself, the son, is one of the only men to rival Mary in combat. This is likely the reason Jacques appears to her in a flash of light, like a shooting star or flare, all too blinding and yet brilliant. Expressing their similarities, I think Mary realizes that though they saw different visions of the world, they shared that brilliance of life, striving for a future yet to be seen. Mary appears before Charles in the same brilliance many years later, during a meteor shower. The beauty and yet potent choice to portray the life of people burning their time away into something they believe, that's what the characters emanated, all of them. Similarly, the story itself is a theater of their lives. It's Les Mis levels of involved, yet it's Hamilton levels of dramatization. Conversations, arguments, betrayals, all play as something to be getting the audience invested and pulled apart down to their highest entertainment value. And I love it for that. It does so many things and succeeds at them so well that it's hard to say. You just have to feel the story when there is so much to feel. I think that's why Shinichi has been able to do so much with this series, though. He knows and understands something deeper within the visual medium to throw us into our seats and enjoy the show. As a little aside here, I started reading Innocent maybe around Innocent Rouge's release. This was not a different manga, but like what Chainsaw Man Part 2 is to Part 1 in 2015. And it was kind of crazy for me. I was so fascinated with this exaggeration of life that proudly flaunted itself, but could be grounded by a terrifying reality and ambition that could never see the light of day. It was a lot of what I was feeling at the time. I've always had trouble understanding my ambition. It's something defined by my desire to use my skills, but clouded by what I believe others do for success that I don't want to. I can't see the things I want to do in the things I do because everyone else seems to find success doing something I don't. In Innocent, Henry's goal is to end executions, outlaw them. But that doesn't happen in his lifetime, nor his son's. It's nearly 100 years later. They continue to be executioners for the sake of those around them that tell them it's their destiny, but they repeatedly petition to end the cycle. He is soft-hearted, but has an ambition that no one can see for him and his family and the people around him. I can feel that in a lot of ways, having talked to people that want me to be able to do big things or small things, but can't see me doing the things I want somehow. Though since Charles never accomplishes what he wants, then maybe that's a sign I shouldn't pursue it. Is what I would say if Mary didn't exist, who pursued things no one saw for her to such success that it did kill her. It's a very rabbit and tortoise situation. Rush to a happy ending or let it wait. But this brings us to Shinichi's newest work, Dracula, Midnight Children. This is a retelling of classic Dracula set in a boys' private school. The king of vampires himself is perhaps the most visually spectacular part of it, though. He is made of all the visuals and beauty you'd expect of something unfathomable. He is undeniably what hallucinations, dreams, and magic look like. He's a dark fairy leaping and flying, with the power of a beast lurking just beneath. Similar to Innocent, the story weaves diary entries as its primary method of story. It makes it difficult to follow at times. Everyone's perspective of events is tied together, but the way everyone sees themselves and those around them is what makes the story visually entertaining. I find myself lost at times in what's happening, but still enchanted in the perspective of its characters. Shinichi has the sense of playing with the page in this series that goes further than an Innocent, bending words, images, and the story itself, for that matter, into something almost overpowering. Everything drips with this imagery of life we know, being confronted with an ancient power. Then the drama of such an intricate set of relationships, all speckled in a much more visceral art style, baked in cross-hatching and noise textures, defining this Gothic retelling. I brought up some of Shinichi's more specific style choices, but more so focused on how Shinichi used them to portray full images. I think that's Innocent's strength, is conveying those full characters and scenes, putting them on a stage. It oozed its sense of drama so well because the style and imagery matched when needed and played as it desired. But in Dracula, the style and art escalates that. You're surrounded by that Gothic experience, but also something more deeply set into the world. You can see the dark enchantment turning each page cast on the reader and the characters. How a panel is a door or a window. It's a series, or more so an author, that understands how the medium of manga can link such dreadful lives and such an absolute beauty of brilliance. Another series I've seen understand what it means to capture the medium of manga is the lovely adaptation of Fate Grand Order Shimosa. I'm a big Fate Grand Order fan, having latched onto the series in high school and still a somewhat consistent player. This series itself is a long journey of saving the world, but the focus of this manga is one of the interlude chapters between the first major arc and the second one. Illustrated and written by Rei Wataru, Pseudo-Singularity Shimosa takes our female protagonist, Uritsuka, and sends her to a dreamlike reality where her companions take on roles in the world and enemies yet to be seen or known begin their plots for power. If you're not familiar with the overall Fate series, though, I'll make note here that many of the characters in the series are people of legend from human history. Napoleon, King Arthur, Gilgamesh, but also Hans Christian Andersen, Scheherazade, Sherlock Holmes, and Charles Henry Sanson. Shimosa is set in an alternate ancient Japan. So many of the characters in this one are historical figures of Japan. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary wandering swordsman who boasted his skills by challenging all of the top-notch samurai he could, is even one of the protagonists of this story. What makes this such an interesting manga, though, is that the writing is already done. The game's arc is already told in full detail within the game itself, holding incredible emotional and story depth, and it came out in 2017 on the JP servers. So how does a manga, a storytelling format that is half its writing, meet expectations to properly capture a story that is already several years old? Well, at least for the JP audience. That's another thing about the game's Shimosa arc. It's fairly divisive to English audiences depending on who is reading it and what they see in it. Based on what I've seen, it's considered either a flimsy story with some badass moments and unforgiving fights, or one of the best chapters in the interludes. But that is what I think makes the manga a perfect next step. If the writing is done, there's a place to make the work exude what a format like a mobile game alone cannot. The key word of the day: atmosphere. The atmosphere of Shimosa is one that is sinking into fear, where one wrong move can set up your death. It's an old world where much of the earth is still rural. I think that Rei sets this really well in their line work. There's a tactile texture to things, with stones, forest, and even the sense of motion. Hardly anyone stands perfectly rigid. They have a natural sense of movement and conversations to their being. The line work of the manga has these long strokes to them, but also a natural scratch of a pen. Rei uses traditional paper, screen tones, and inking for the story, but has began using some digital aspects of more recent chapters too. A lot of what you can see in the scratchiness of the line work is from the natural movement of the pen and ink, even in the places where lines are retraced to thicken them. It helps create this somewhat sense of a gritty world, and yet clearly defined shapes of movement make it readable. A lot of this line work also comes in the cross-hatching that shades across many parts of the manga. It darkens part of the world in a way that emanates this energy, like there's light that can barely pass the darkness. It's especially present in the battles, giving the sense of motion intensity that a story like this desperately needs. Each stroke and line defines a swing of a sword or momentum of a jab, but my favorite is the dramatic lighting in the battles. There's several times where characters don't actually yell. There's no text bubble or sound effect there, but you can see it on their face and hear it in your mind. The main premise, the way the bosses of this world come about, is through the corruption of hell itself. They curse the spirits of the summoned heroes and turn them into undead and maddened monsters. In the case of our protagonist, Musashi, a female in this story, it's a fate thing. And Ritsuka make their first ally in Ishin. Ishin is a legendary monk and spearman in Japan, having revived a specific study called Hozoin, a style of spear combat built on its foundation and essentially ensured that the martial art lived into the next generation. But just as quickly, they are caught in a fight against the cursed swordsman, and Ishin sacrifices himself to allow them escape. What they are all unaware of, though, is that Ishin was their target. He had been summoned to be corrupted, and in that, Rei draws a pillar of light, drowning an Iker. When Musashi is faced with him again, she sees this. There is this guttural ache, where the soundless panel of his spirit is somehow screaming. And you can feel it through your very being. It's a terrifying panel, and yet to me, there is an odd beauty in the detail and care to create this expression in it. Screen tones are deeply a part of this. Rei uses so many techniques together so cleanly that unless you're trying to analyze it, you can only see the final image. Using traditional techniques, it ends up making sense how well Rei's understanding of screen tone placement, layering with line work, and cross-hatching all make such incredibly dynamic scenes. There's a depth as the screen tone set up the backdrops, with inks filling hard lighting, but also dynamic ranges of impact and detail through the line work, which actually brings us back to line and the way it plays not into just literal lines being drawn, but the very experience of art. In art, there's a foundational technique of composition called leading lines or flow. It's often used in comics and perspective to draw the reader's eye a certain direction or create a certain motion. In American comics, this is usually presented through word bubbles, panel sequences, where characters are obviously moving across one panel to the next, and literal lines of motion. Your eye can follow the actions of the characters or scene being presented because they lead you through perspective. Line details like swooshes, impacts, and background lines, and your natural sense of space created by the story. If things are vaguely defined, it becomes harder to understand what to expect of the movement of battle or scene if people are just suddenly in a different position. So leading lines is typically the technique used to alleviate this broken feeling. She mostly uses a lot of leading lines. The power of swings, the movement of attacks, and the sense of direction are always very clear. If someone slashes or stabs, direction is followed through by the details in the surrounding shading, with the composition always positioning the focus where the reader's eye should end up at the end of the line. Characters play into this too, where their natural body language is readable, and if they see something or are moving to do something, it becomes more obvious that they are interacting with their world, and so the reader is going to as well. There becomes a natural flow for everything as things go from this. The environment and lines can quake around a buildup as an enemy takes a step. Light can dance through the trees as figures move across or beneath its branches. light can burst across a darkened and bloodied battlefield. Or a small drop can obliterate an entire forest. This power to so impressively create presence can be a detriment, though. In some cases, giving more attention to the atmosphere can make what scene-to-scene action there is feel broken up or oddly paced. As someone who understands the visual flow of lines a bit more, I tend not to have a problem with that part, but I have seen a lot of people mention it in the Fate Grand Order community in regards to Shimosa. I can see what they mean too. When I try to consider what an average manga reader may be looking for in reading a title like Shimosa, it can be like a fastball. There's a good story, but in an adaptation where some of the foes you're facing being one-on-one in the game, suddenly being given the dimensionality of actually moving across the battlefield, it can lose the benefit of clarity for the trade-off of interesting visuals. But I feel Rei's work does a better job at capturing those more realistic aspects of fighting. The choices that happen in seconds, where your enemy won't wait your turns out to try and kill you. You get the chance to feel the true tension and fear in a battle that the game's mechanics can only convey as nail your strategy or restart for the 20th time outside of story dialogues. That's ultimately what makes Shimosa a great adaptation in all its aspects too. You don't feel like you're seeing a story or game you've already experienced. You get to see the full power and intention of telling this kind of story in the first place. I think that is part of Rei's strength as an artist. There's a clear care to present not just the horrors of this world, but the true investment of bringing life to the characters. The beauty in Rei's general art are these moments of seeing a full world in one image, where you can know a character's whole being in one look. There is care in design, not just for full images, but doodles and environments, where you can tell they decided each aspect with purpose. There's little motifs that can halo a character that add this sweet touch to them, like their energy is a part of them that simply has to exist. The textiles and designs of fabrics have this beautiful intricacy. The heat of battle can be palpable with a sense of motion and the character's expression exuding determination. Their style is simply beautiful. I think their sense for design and style make them a great match for Shimosa. As a fellow artist, I truly can't imagine the way you learn to nail your work like this. Perhaps because I'm in an odd space with my work right now, but there's this level of understanding and work that Wataru seems to have to their art style that is incredibly inspiring. Their stylistic choices are not just beautiful, but they have this incredible sense of self and awareness that I can only imagine took a long time and a lot of work to really get to, including the time and work not just in Shimosa, but their previous manga too. Rei's character designs are a big benefit to the atmosphere of Shimosa. They are adapting existing designs, but redesigning them too. Musashi, in Rei's style, is much more nimble feeling, where I feel the game has her with a fairly wide build to express a more samurai-like stature. But in the manga, she has this lightness to her, where she's still strong, no doubt, but obviously quick. And every expression she makes is full of personality. It can be the goofiest grin you've ever seen, or the most fear you think a person can experience. It's incredible. Every character feels like they fit in the world, like there's a happiness in them, but a deep and dark desperation they can be driven to. For a lot of people in the Fate Grand Order community, it's likely the first time characters like Raiko feel genuinely terrifying, where her presence is so strong that any movement she makes is enough to make the ground flinch beneath her. But she's still notably the ever-sexy mother figure from the game. God bless Rita and all that. Ritsuka is the one that takes the front seat in means of meaningful design adaptation. Since you don't see the player character very often, but are given a decent amount of character in their speaking options, the way Rei draws expressions give Ritsuka this edge and brilliance when in battle, while maintaining a caring and fun character around others. And Rei's distinct style puts that sense of design to all the characters in the series. They express the dynamic sense of self that you'd expect of real people facing incarnations of hell itself while holding up their humanity. Personally, I have to say, this is definitely a series I'm gonna own and print in its entirety, even if it's only in Japanese. There's something so brilliant and blinding about it that I have to have, and I'm excited about that. I hope Shimosa can get a proper spotlight. It sort of did when Rei designed the characters for Samurai Remnant. But even so, I hope that English print comes out. If you're interested in reading Shimosa in particular, it's available through Kodansha Digital, web only, sorry. It's also in the time I've gone to edit the script that they finally updated with the next volume. There are other places to read it, but with Kodansha pushing for more digital purchases and the possibility of on-demand print services like Kodansha Print Club, I really encourage you to check it out on their website. Plus, then you can see the full page quality art in all its glory. For Dracula, Viz is hardcover publishing it in English, in their signature size, so it is also a large enough format for you to appreciate the art. For Innocent, Dark Horse Comics has it in omnibus, and it's not flipped. In fact, there is a wealth of information on the real historical references and several of the poems and blurbs that Shinichi wrote for the original volume releases. I was really worried about getting it when I had read that Vagabond had been soft flipped by Dark Horse in some cases of its release, where they had not mirrored the pages but rearranged the panels to read left to right order. But I of course read that online, so it could have been a much, much older release. Innocent, though, is not flipped at all, I'm happy to report. Additionally, the pages are stark white and printed on heavier paper in the standard large print for manga. The black and white tones appear beautifully in contrast, while still leaving decent and detailed midtones. Honestly worth it. But, alright, Innocent, Dracula, and Shimosa. Why talk about these specific series when there are others that do the same techniques or is just as good and don't do this kind of thing at all? Well, honestly, because I know these series, and among what I've read, there aren't many that marry these things to darkness the way these do. Not just in the sense of horror, but an energy pouring out of the page, trying to be felt. In Dracula and Innocent's case, they literally have poured off the page. Innocent did get a stage play, a musical in particular. I actually bought the DVD copy of it. It did not have subs. It wasn't as good as the manga, in my opinion, but I felt they understood many of the comparisons to modern life that Shinichi made, and they weren't afraid to make it kind of horrifying at times. Marie Antoinette uses a cell phone. When she's in her room, she snacks on a bag of chips. And when she talks, she brings modern ideas forward. The show even opens and ends on a hallucination of the future in a way, where all the characters are modern kids simply trying to live for what they believe in. For Dracula, there was a special showcase of sorts where they had an immersive art exhibit where projections of the manga's panels were animated and framed around the chapel of the Guez de Balzac in France. I hope I pronounced that correctly. That exhibit, they even created an original music score for it. It's not simply that they're beautiful. It's not simply the personal preference. I think that there's something to Rei and Shinichi's work that is worth talking about. You probably have your own picks for miserably beautiful manga. I wouldn't be surprised if someone said Berserk, Poon Poon, or Vagabond. Maybe a few Hell's Paradise, or a deep cut like Brad Hurley Coach. I have these things I want to share because being confronted with an image so bridled with energy that can make your blood rush either in excitement or fear, that's what stories are for. That's why they portray the gnashing of teeth, the wailing of ghosts, and the creak of doors. To seep that energy into your brain and make you connect to something you may never know. To entertain you with thrills and drama. To show you that atmosphere is not just a setting, but a feeling. How even the most miserable of stories, there is a beauty to be seen.